Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the SITS member webinar on how using a managed service provider could benefit your public sector organisation. This webinar is run in association with ESPO, who are SITS's knowledge partner for public frameworks and contracting. My name's Danielle Goodrick, and I'm Knowledge Product Manager at SITS, and I'll shortly be handing over to the presenter, David Malin, from ESPO to start the webinar. First of all, I'd just like to check that you can all hear me. I realise that everyone's on mute setting, so if you wouldn't mind just using the chat question facility to send a message and let me know that the technology's working, that would be great. That's great, thank you. I think everyone can hear us. I'll just quickly run through some housekeeping, so if you can keep your microphones on mute throughout the webinar, that would be great. And if you'd like to ask any questions or make any comments, please add these to the top of the screen to the panellists and organisers only. Then at the end of the webinar, we'll then ask the panellists the questions. However, any we can't answer today, ESPO will endeavour to follow up to do so as soon as possible with you directly. So without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to David now to start the webinar. Thank you, David.
Hello and welcome to the webinar. I've been in public sector procurement for over 10 years and I'm the contract manager for the MSTAR2 framework. Today, I will talk about how managed service providers can help you and how the MSTAR2 framework can provide you with a vehicle to their services. So what do we mean by a managed service provider? You may have heard the term managed service provider before, but do you actually know what it means and the key benefits of using one? To sum it up in one paragraph would be, a managed service provider is a model that works to a single engagement, multi-source route. Therefore, a type of service provision where a single managed service provider takes responsibility for your temporary staffing requirements as opposed to you managing a selection of individual agencies themselves. Part of the service will involve the managed service provider operating a tiered structure of agencies to deliver the services, the details of which are dependent on the service model you use. The tiering structure can be developed throughout the life of the contract and changed to suit particular situations. You can include specific agencies that are key to your service within the tiers. Suppliers will engage with your incumbent agencies to sign up any that are important to you to ensure continuation of your service. This is key for the success of your contract. For ease, I'm going to refer as a managed service provider as an MSP for the rest of this webinar. Benefits. There are many benefits of using an MSP, not just reducing costs. We'll look at these over the next few slides. Dealing with a single point of contact. It's easier to make one phone call rather than several to individual agencies to obtain the staff you need. Streamlining of invoicing. Again, consolidating your efforts, putting all your invoices into one rather than hundreds from individual agencies on a weekly basis. Structured management information and reporting. Providing visibility of your temporary workforce, what you are spending, and in what areas of the organisation. Supporting wider initiatives such as demand management and workforce planning. So help with reducing your overall spend on temporary staff through reducing your actual requirements. Competitive and standardised fees. Not being stung by unforeseen costs and inflated agency costs where they control the market. Accuracy and transparency of fees and cost savings. An MSP will ensure all charges are correct and you are able to see clearly the full breakdown of the fees involved. Performance-based tiering of agencies to encourage service quality. As discussed earlier, tiering of agencies based on performance can improve your supply. Allowing access to a number of tiered agencies will ensure sufficient capacity and supply exists. So another positive of having an MSP managing a supply chain is that they can manage it to either a limited number of agencies which are dependable or extend to a greater number when the supply is less consistent, thus ensuring continuity of supply. Robust compliance checks. Ensuring consistent compliance and reassurance around employment checks and safeguarding. This removes a certain amount of the burden from you and puts the onus on the MSP to ensure all necessary checks are completed before a temp starts work at your organisation. These checks will include the standard checks around their ability to work in the UK, and for social care, DBS and HCPC checks, employment history of up to 10 years, and a number of other checks considered imperative. You can specify additional checks wherever you deem these necessary. Supporting organisations in addressing the requirements and operation of the Agency Worker Directive. Some of the Agency Worker Directive aspects can be tricky at the best of times. So having an MSP can help alleviate the pain of implementing the regulations with regards to monitoring workers who are coming up to pay parity and looking at ways of addressing long tenure positions. A greater opportunity for local and SME suppliers within the MSP supply chain. The government's SME agenda is key for this market, as the majority of agencies fall into this category. An MSP will utilise local agencies for your organisation wherever possible. All difficult to fill sectors have their own challenges, but common themes to these are staff shortages, staff quality, and increasing costs. Over the years, there have been a shortage of qualified or high-quality staff in a number of sectors, predominantly the social care, IT, professional services, and education sectors. The growing struggle to recruit means that use of recruitment agencies to fill temporary and permanent roles has increased. Many organisations do so as they have failed to recruit themselves previously, which is adding to organisations' recruitment costs. In regards to the quality of staff, it is unnerving to know that as there is a lack of quality staff to fill specialised roles, organisations can feel compelled to fill positions with unqualified or lower quality staff due to there being long periods of time where positions are not filled. This shortage of staff then leads to overinflated prices with a lack of control on spend. To give you some examples of this, did you know that spending on supply teachers has gone up by more than a quarter over 2 years as head teachers struggle to plug staffing gaps? This is supported by the fact that spending on supply teachers has gone up by almost £300 million over 2 years, with the average amount spent by academies and free schools rising by 42% in a single year. Another example is with social care. The councils across England are struggling to fill their social care professional vacancies due to budgetary pressures from cuts and the lack of qualified social workers with real-life experience. There is predicted to be a mismatch of the supply and demand of social care professionals of 1 million workers by 2025, which will lead to a shortfall on predicted demand of 35%. A solution to these issues could be the MSTAR2 framework, which has been created from the need to renew the massively successful original MSTAR framework. Some of our headline achievements would be the 186 customers that utilise the framework and £82 million of savings for the public purse that have been achieved over the lifetime of the framework. We expect MSTAR2 to continue this success. Okay, so I've talked about the benefits of using an MSP, so now it's time to explain how it works on the MSTAR2 framework. As we discussed previously, using the MSP solution will help you to source through a wide supply chain of agencies, whilst gaining control of the supply chain and the inflated costs involved with sourcing direct from recruitment agencies. There are a number of challenges that suppliers and customers face, which the MSTAR2 framework is designed to overcome. Challenges such as off-contract spend, reduced fulfillment levels, increased time to hire, and lower levels of local engagement. These are all current challenges that the suppliers on the framework are aware of and set up to develop strategies to overcome these issues. Suppliers awarded on this framework are fully capable in adapting to the changing nature of the labour market and providing increased flexibility to tailor solutions to the evolving needs of public services as they change shape, scale, and scope. We're going to talk a little about the delivery models available under MSTAR2. These 3 models are reasonably well known in the market as neutral, master, and hybrid. So lot 1, neutral supply chain management. The fundamental point with a neutral model is that the MSP does not supply any temporary agency workers itself, but instead manages a supply chain of agencies to provide temporary agency workers to fulfill bookings. The MSP can use associated or subsidiary companies as a source of supply, subject to these companies being treated and competing equally, so giving no advantage or disadvantage over any other agency in the supply chain. This model ensures that the solution to each requirement is objectively determined from the marketplace at all times. Depending on where agencies are within the tiered provision, this lot gives all agencies the same chance to put forward candidates. Lot 2, the master supply chain management. This model does allow the MSP to use their own temporary workers to fulfill vacancies or generate a pool of staff, which is the first tier, which may include your own pool. Further tiers of agencies may also be used where necessary to fulfill bookings the MSP cannot fill directly. The MSPs will be able to offer different delivery models. These may include different categories of staffing being managed via different protocols, so a percentage fill rate from their own pool before giving the requirement out to the supply chain, or a fixed time period within which to directly fill a role before it is passed to the supply chain. This model means that the supplier has a responsibility for the management of relationships with all other agencies, enabling you to benefit from an aggregated and simplified service while retaining the breadth of supply from multiple sources. So lot 3, supply chain optimization or hybrid. This lot allows you to define a sourcing strategy by using a combination of models and strategies depending on your resourcing objectives. For example, to deliver savings or to address the difficulties experienced in filling some job categories or any of the local priorities that may be required. As we discussed previously, we identified that many customers were having fulfillment issues within some difficult to fill sectors, such as social care, planning, engineering and drivers. It was agreed that there needs to be some sort of provision for the engagement of these sectors and their specialist agencies to utilise their knowledge of the market to try and solve the issues faced by customers. The creation of this new hybrid lot gives you the ability to create your own solution by having different strategies for sourcing staff in different job categories. This can be achieved by using the MSP's own pool or direct from the supply chain, and can be for any number of individual job categories. So we're now going to run a poll question, and I'll hand you back to SITS.
Thank you, David. So everyone, the poll question will now appear on your screen. If you can select one of the following options listed, we'll then create the poll and feed that back to you. So if we can launch the poll question now, which one of the following models do you currently use? Number 1, a neutral vendor model. Number 2, master vendor model. Number 3, a hybrid model. Or number 4, do not use an MSP.
I'll just leave you. I'm going to give people a few seconds there to get their votes in. Okay, so currently it's showing that at 21% neutral vendor model, 12% master vendor model, 6% hybrid, and 61, it's just changed to do not use an MSP.
Okay, that's very interesting. Well, thank you for all your responses. I'll now hand you back to David to continue the webinar.
It is interesting to see 61% not using an MSP model currently, so hopefully this will be of use to quite a few people. So there have been a high number of innovative solutions shown by suppliers on the MSTAR2 framework. For the hybrid solution, they have also identified specific delivery models with the ability to address the customer's particular problem categories or job roles. Some of the hybrid models have included a specialist agency. The specialist agency will operate in the difficult-to-fill category and manage the requirements for the customer, still operating under the MSP, but creating their own micro-supply chain for the specified category only. Therefore, these suppliers are able to use their knowledge of the market for that sector and help with the fulfillment issues. So, for example, with social care as a difficult-to-fill category, a specialist agency would come in and develop a supply chain of other specialist agencies in the social care category, but still operating under the MSP. I wanted to touch on the service levels that can be selected into MSTAR 2. We have a transactional service model, which is considered a minimum for this type of service supplied by an MSP. Then there are additional strategic services that can be added according to your own needs. For the transactional service model, there's a minimum specification that will be required by customers accessing the framework. The transactional service is for basic functionality for selecting, ordering, and placing temporary agency workers, also including consolidated invoicing, standard MI reporting, supply chain auditing, remote account management, and electronic system ordering. We refer to this as the core specification. Strategic services. These are a choice of additional services which can be added to the transactional service specification should you require them. This will enable you to choose and build your service to the required level. Customers' requirements can change over time, and these strategic services may be removed or added with total transparency of the costs involved. I want to give you an example of a strategic service. The focal point of this webinar has been about the recruitment of temporary staff. However, there is also a permanent strategic service that you can choose to add alongside your temporary requirements. This can then help with attracting permanent quality staff through marketing and brand development. I can also tell you that this framework can also help with sourcing graduates through other more specific attraction techniques. To ensure capacity and resilience are maintained, we have created a multi-supplier framework with an increased number of suppliers. MSTAR 2 now features 13 suppliers, an increase of 3 from the original. All suppliers providing services on the original MSTAR have been awarded the position on the new framework, allowing customers an easy transition to MSTAR 2 and continued supply should they wish to remain with their current supplier. It goes without saying that the benefits of using a framework will save you a significant amount of time and money, as there is no need to do a full OJEU compliant process yourself. Also, all ESPO frameworks are free to access and fully compliant with EU and UK procurement regulations. Furthermore, all suppliers are checked in advance to meet strict quality standards set out in the tender. Through the tendering process, the suppliers are vetted against certain selection criteria which must be met as a minimum. Key elements of these checks are the supplier's insurance levels and their financial standing. Another benefit of a framework is a high level of contract management employed by ESPO. Ongoing checks and audits of the suppliers on the framework to ensure compliance. Key areas of these ongoing checks are the supplier's insurance levels and their financial standing. Frameworks include pre-agreed terms and conditions, so there's no need for customers to have to go through the sometimes lengthy process of agreeing terms and conditions with the suppliers before contracts can be signed. Accessing the services of an MSP couldn't be easier. Once you've downloaded the user guide, ESPO will then send you the latest versions of the pricing files, including the strategic services, the core specification, and supplier overview pages. You can access the framework via both call-off and further competition options. If you do wish to conduct a further competition, ESPO has further competition template documentation available if required. The contract documentation, or the customer agreement, is already prepared and will only need minimal input from you with your specific information. We strongly suggest you carry out market research, liaise with the suppliers to understand their models and offerings and how they can best suit your requirements. I'll now hand you back to Danielle for the poll question.
Thank you, David. Well, I hope you found that as enjoyable as we have. We've got one final poll question today before we go to the Q&A session to answer any questions that you may have for David on the topic covered today. But from a SIPS point of view, we really value your attendance today and your input. And in order for us to provide the most relevant topics and information going forward, we'd like you to confirm which of the following topics would be most of interest in future, either as a guidance piece or as a webinar topic. So the poll question should now come up on the screen. If you can please select the following topics which would be of interest for a future guidance piece or webinar, that would be great, and then we'll collate the results at the end. So we've got number 1, consultancy services, 2, managed training services, 3, staff benefits, and 4, HR suite.
Again, we'll just give people a few seconds because they keep changing their minds.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Do you want those results now, Danielle?
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks, Claire.
Okay. It should. There you go. You should be able to see those there on the screen. So
we've got consultancy services, 51%. Is that?
Yes.
Right, okay, consultancy services 51%, managed training services 17, staff benefits 14, and HR suite 17. So I think the consultancy services seems like a topic of most interest. So we'll look at developing some resources in the near future around that topic area. So if you can look out for updates on the ESPO page on the SIPS website, which is www.sips.org/ESPO for further updates. So I think we've had a few questions for our panel today. So I'll now hand you over to Claire to ask some of the questions and for David to respond, and I'll speak to you again shortly. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Danielle. Okay, so first question we've got here is, does the procuring body need to identify the strategy for the hybrid model, or can it be suggested by the suppliers in their proposal based on company information provided in the spec?
Yes, so what I would suggest to customers is when they do their further competition document is if they have issues or problems that they need addressing, they put those to the suppliers. I mean, it can be led on from some of their initial engagement questions that they with suppliers. So if they say, for example, we have a problem in this area or this area, what's the best way of solving that issue? Then they can do that, or they could put a scenario together in the further competition document and put that forward, and then base their award on what they consider to be the most appropriate response to solving their issues. So yes, the latter of those two questions was the way I would go with it.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, David. The next question is, where we use micro supply chain for challenging categories to fulfill, will there be multi-level markup? I can't read it. Just more, bear with me a second. The screen is really difficult to read. So will there be a multi-level markup for each tier under the micro supply chain?
No. So the agency fees are already agreed. If you obviously call off from the framework, there's already pricing set up for that. The tiers underneath that are the same agency fee will apply. So it's not a different fee for each tier or any other structure than what we've created within the framework. If they were to do a further competition, I would suggest that they don't give that option. They simply base it on an agency fee for a particular category. They don't give any option to tier it at different levels of the supply chain.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. So this one says, many stakeholders complain an MSP adds an extra level cost when they could put an individual, they could get an individual cheaper directly. The benefits do not directly affect them. How can we overcome these concerns?
I suppose, well, I think we've talked about a lot of the benefits of having an MSP today within this webinar. A lot of organisations do think about putting in their own sort of recruitment team, but obviously that does imply a lot of risk for the organisation, whereas if an organisation uses an MSP, then that risk is obviously shared with the MSP rather than it being wholly on them. That question may well need a lot more discussion with that particular customer. So if you could forward that one on to me, I could obviously speak to them in more detail later on. But that would be my first point of call with that particular organisation. Would be who wants, they want to share the risk, and having their own team puts a lot of emphasis and a lot of cost onto their own internal teams if they choose to go down that route.
Okay, brilliant. Also, we've got a question from someone wanting to go over the hybrid model again. I mean, would you want to quickly cover that, or would you prefer to take that one offline as well and go directly to the customer?
Yeah, I mean, it may well be that I can talk to them again directly one-on-one. But do you want me to just read that slide out again?
Yeah, you can do. Yeah.
If I just find out where it is, just bear with me one second. Okay, so I've got it here. So what I've said is this lot allows you to define a sourcing strategy by using a combination of models and strategies, depending on your resourcing objectives, for example, to deliver savings or to address the difficulties experienced in filling some job categories or any of the local priorities. So it's agreed that there needs to be some sort of provision for the engagement of these sectors and their specialist agencies to utilise their knowledge of the market to try and solve the issues faced by customers. The creation of this new hybrid lot gives you the ability to create your own solution by having different strategies for sourcing staff in different job categories. Okay, this can be achieved by using the MSP's own pool or direct from the supply chain and can be for any number of individual job categories. So I'll just move on to the next one. There we go. So some of the hybrid models have included a specialist agency. So the specialist agency will operate in the difficult to fill category and manage the requirements for the customer, still operating under the MSP, but creating their own micro supply chain for the specified category only. Therefore, these suppliers are able to use their knowledge of the market for that sector and help with the fulfillment issues. So the example I gave was social care. It's obviously a difficult to fill category for a lot of customers. So basically a specialist agency would come in and develop a supply chain of other specialist agencies in the social care category, but still operating under the MSP. And obviously I can discuss that in length with the individual person should they wish to.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, we can pass those details on to you. We have another question. What volume of spend would you need for MSP neutral or hybrid models?
That's a good question. It varies really on the complexity of the customer. So, for example, some organisations we have a mixed bag really. So we go from your local district authorities, district councils, all the way up to large London boroughs and unitary trusts. So as long as you engage with the supply chain first and let them understand what your requirement is and what appetite there is for your requirement, then that'll be a good indicator. But I would generally say somewhere in the region of a few £100,000 possibly. That would be something that suppliers would most definitely be interested in. Anything less than that, then obviously I would suggest that you engage with suppliers just to understand whether or not it is viable for them commercially to take on that role for you.
Brilliant, thanks David. Next one, what's the best approach for moving from MSTAR to MSTAR 2?
Best approach, again, it depends on what the internal customer journey has to be, whether or not they have any internal procedures to meet. So it can be just a case of internally they have to meet certain criteria, i.e. their internal bodies want them to do a further competition, or they're happy for them just to call off again. but the basic elements are, it's pretty much the same specification from the previous one to the new one, similar sorts of suppliers, so it's just a case of ensuring that they meet internally the processes that they need to meet. Then it's just a case of understanding whether or not they can call off straight with the same supplier, or they want to do further engagement and call off with a different one. So again, it depends on what their individual requirements are, but it is pretty straightforward if they just want to call off.
Brilliant, thank you. So the next one is, our requirement is primarily for waste operatives. Can it be met by this MSP model?
Generally speaking, the MSP model looks at your whole requirement. So whether that be waste operatives or operational people, admin, social care, they would rather look at the whole portfolio of temporary staff rather than just one category. But if you just have a requirement for one category of staff, then obviously that will depend upon the value of that, whether or not the MSP would consider that to be a viable option. So generally speaking, they would look at the whole, they would want to take on the whole of your requirements. So not just one category, but as I say, if it is just one category, then obviously the volume would be the key question, whether or not it's sustainable for the MSP to take it on board.
Brilliant, thank you. What types of portal is provided by the MSP to channel candidates?
Well, they've all got their own systems. These have all been looked at by myself, and they all meet the minimum specifications within our core spec. They're all pretty similar, to be honest with you. They all do the same basic functionality. Some have got additional elements to them, but they've all got excellent ways of, as I say, ordering, selecting, and filtering those types of candidates that you want to put forward. It also depends on what sort of service level you want. So if you want filtering of CVs and that sort of HR element, then that is a strategic service that you can add on. But generally, all the systems are of a certain standard that would meet 99% of customers' requirements.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, there are a few questions that are quite specific, so obviously I'll pass your details on to David to contact you, because there's quite a lot of questions from one organisation in particular, so we'll make sure that David answers the questions after the webinar. We have another question here. Given the reduced fees available and the distance from the employer brought about by the framework, how does this MSP incentivize new suppliers to join?
Can you say that one again, sorry?
Yeah, given the reduced fees available and the distance from the employer brought about by the framework, how does this MSP incentivize new suppliers to join?
So the first point of that would be that the MSP would engage with your local agencies first. So that would reduce the cost, the distance down. They would look at your local supply chain. What was the second part of the question?
Let's have a look.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. So given the reduced fees available and the distance from the employer brought about by the framework, how does the MSP incentivize new suppliers to join? Right,
yeah. So basically it will be through bulk supply. So a lot of these MSPs will have current contracts already in place, and they will have a vast supply chain of agencies already working with them. So it will be a case of identifying where the gaps in it are in the current supply chain for that customer, if there are any, and then they will obviously speak to their supply chain and basically incentivize them from the additional volume. And then obviously that will bring about cost savings.
Excellent, thank you. And this is the last question we've got. So 90% of our demand is for social workers. Can you suggest which would suit our requirements best?
To be honest, it could be any of the three lots would hopefully be able to put a solution forward. It would be whether or not the customer has a particular model in mind, and whether or not engagement with certain suppliers would bring about more innovative responses for their demands, their requirements rather. So it's whether or not simple engagement would suffice, or whether or not they would need to do further engagement. They are having particular issues. So if they are having a real problem, i.e. 90% social care would indicate to me that may well be having a bit of problems, I would suggest consulting with Lot 3, obviously, because this is tailored to solve issues, not just for social care but other areas as well. But yeah, I would definitely do some engagement, talk to some suppliers, put forward their queries, their problems, their issues, and see what responses they get back, and that may well give them an indication of what lot would best suit their needs. But off the top of my head, I would strongly suggest Lot 3.
Brilliant. Okay, and we've actually got one person that's just snuck in at the last minute. Has there been much uptake? Has there been much uptake of the hybrid option?
There's been a lot of interest in it. I think currently I have spoken to, crikey, must be 30 or more customers, potential customers, that are interested in the hybrid lot, are interested in what it can offer, are interested in how it can solve their issues. So yeah, from that point of view, it has been widely looked at. We do have a number of customers. I would suggest there are 3, off the top of my head, customers that are actually signed up and using a solution under Lot 3, under the hybrid model.
Brilliant. So I'll hand back over to Danielle, is it now?
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you very much, Claire. And thank you, David, for answering those questions. I think some of them require a bit more kind of in-depth, maybe direct contact with some of our members who need a bit more information. So following the webinar, the attendees' details will be shared with ESPO with the questions related to the individual, so that David can follow up with you in a bit more detail directly, or should you wish to ask any further questions. So the handouts from the webinar will also come directly from David, so please look out for these. They should arrive in your inbox within the next 48 hours. The resources as well from today will be located on the ESPO knowledge page on the SIPS website, so be sure to check out the resources available along with the recording of today's webinar as well, so that will be located on that page within the next few days. And the web page to visit, if you're not already aware, is www.sips.org/ESPO. So without further ado, I'd now like to hand you back over to David just to add his thanks for your time and to close the webinar. I hope you found it as valuable as we have. We really value ESPO as our knowledge partner in this area and the insights that they can provide us in making the right decision for our organisation. So thank you very much for your time today, David, and I'll hand it back over to you to close the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to say thank you for the time to take to listen to this webinar, and I hope you found it helpful. I've left my contact details on should you require any further information or support on the topics we've covered today.